I've picked up and put down Assassin's Creed Odyssey many times over in the past 5 years, and I finally decided to beat the base game so I can free up my PC memory, and also as a way to get in some steps. 60 hours of gameplay later, and I have some thoughts. Off the bat, I think this game has some strong points, so I don't necessarily think it's a bad game, but it just feels lackluster. Let's start with the positives. The world is beautiful and the styling is realistic. Combined with the minimal UI and great voice acting for every character, Assassin's Creed Odyssey is very immersive and feels like a vibe to just play through casually. This was my first Assassin's Creed game, but it seems like historical accuracy in the environment and NPC design, and generally the styling of the game, is something that this franchise does well. And Odyssey is no exception. I appreciated the realistic styling as much as they could get away with for it being a video game. I love that pretty much every line had voice acting, and there were a lot of well-directed cutscenes. The combat is generally satisfying, especially when Alexios one-hits, assassinates his targets, or when he crits in drawn-out battles. As long as I kept my equipment up to date, combat pacing felt right. The game is enormous, so there's no shortage of content to play through. Upon beating the base game main story questline, I still had not unmasked all of the Cult of Cosmos, or the other cult that pops up late game. I hadn't even started the orange questline or gotten to the endgame islands. My favorite part of this game was identifying and tracking down and killing the cultists. I think the way that the cult was inserted as a conspiracy in parallel with the overarching war was very interesting. So there's still definitely a lot of content to play past the main storyline. However, I think it would take me over 100 hours to get through most of the content, and based on what I've seen so far from the base storyline, I'm not convinced that, I want to play past the ending. Which, speaking of, let's get into the negatives of the game, which I have some thoughts about. Overall, I feel like this game really gave quantity over quality. The length of the game and the size of the world just did not align with the depth of the systems that were designed. After about 20 hours of gameplay, I had access to all the skills I would need for combat and stealth, so combat started to feel a little repetitive. I kept hoping that combat would get more interesting, but it never did, because once I filled out my skill slots, every fight nearly felt the same. And on the flip side of that, encounters also suffered from a lack of depth. Once you work through a fort or fight through a conquest battle, you've pretty much done them all. Stealth also suffers from the same issue. There aren't enough ways to play actively with stealth. For example, other stealth games offer a distraction mechanic, such as throwing a rock to get an enemy's attention or pulling them away from a certain area. In Assassin's Creed Odyssey, if I wanted to play perfectly stealthy and not get caught at all, I'm often waiting around not doing much, which doesn't feel great. And again, because the system isn't that deep, it just becomes incredibly repetitive. So because the core active system of the game didn't really have much for me to look forward to, I often took breaks from the game because it would feel like a slog every time I tried to play through the game. I would do 2 to 3 story quests and would then get bored because the gameplay just felt so one-dimensional. And because I took so many breaks, the story quests and character relationships didn't really stick with me. There were a few standout side characters, but overall, many were forgettable. I think that is the unfortunate result of the styling of the game as well, because you do get realistic looking characters, but they are often forgettable, and I could never really distinguish the more important NPCs from one another. Partway through the game, I changed the difficulty setting to easy, and I felt the pacing became more acceptable at this point. Because the combat lacked depth, I felt as if the difficulty setting was just adding HP to the enemies to soak up damage, rather than making the combat more challenging or enjoyable. So changing the difficulty made the pacing of the combat line up with how complex it is. Another system I didn't enjoy was equipment. I appreciated that I could find one piece or set of equipment that had the stats and effects I wanted for my build, and just upgrade it as I leveled, but once I found legendary armor, I no longer had any need for anything else. A lot of what you pick up throughout the game just becomes junk that gets recycled for materials or sold for gold. And while that's generally okay to have some junk that you can sell for currency or break into materials, the process to do so would just feel so lengthy and unnecessary. Generally, there's a defining character, moment, battle, boss, map, something that makes a game memorable. In Assassin's Creed Odyssey, I don't think I really got that. The characters felt cliche, the combat encounters felt all the same, even battles that were meant to be a theatrical moment just felt so unspecial. I wanted to like the game because of how beautiful, vast, and sweaty things were, but I was left disappointed. I think the resources dedicated to making this game big for big's sake would have been better served developing a deeper combat system, diversifying the skill trees, or designing more interesting fort and boss encounters. I feel as if this game is unfortunately a symptom of the large-scale sandbox open world trend from the mid-2010s that every AAA studio and publisher tried to capitalize on. And because the market is so saturated, I think there are other products that are much more worth your time and money than this one. I often hear that this game has great replay value, but I would have to disagree because there's just nothing that really makes me want to pick up this game at all. There's a large chunk of endgame content that I have yet to play through, and I have zero desire of getting through it. The story and lore incentives just aren't there for me. I don't want to play with the same system and map designs over and over just to learn more about the Cult of Cosmos, and that was my favorite part. Overall, I cannot recommend this game. Unless you really enjoy ancient Greece or are a big fan of the Assassin's Creed franchise, I would just skip this entry. Damn, they up in my asshole.